Hello everyone! On January 1st, 1863, U.S. President Abraham Lincoln proclaims enslaved people to be free. The southern states, which have the most slaves, refuse to obey. 350,000 people, held against their will, remain in the state of Louisiana. Each of them faces a difficult choice: wait for the Army of the North to free them, or start fighting for their freedom right away. A photo of the man who chose the second option traveled the world, with the scars on his back telling the story of the numerous horrors he had endured. Dodin and her 4 children are picking cotton under the supervision of armed horsemen. Some of the slaves are transported past them in a cage. Later in the evening, Dodin's husband Peter recites a prayer while he washes his wife's feet. They are saying their goodbyes. They don't know if they will ever see each other again. 2 men appear in the doorway to take Peter away. He's being sent to his new owner. They don't let Peter give his family one last hug and drag him outside by force. Peter hears the screams of the children and tries to go back to them, putting up a fight. He stops only when the men threaten to shoot Dodin. Peter then agrees to get onto the wagon. When Peter turns away, the angry men hit the unruly slave in the back of the head to put him in his place. The plantation owner is unhappy that his best blacksmith is being taken away from him, but those are the rules. He has to pay the tax to the state. Peter is put in a cage with the other slaves and taken away like cattle.
Stay together! Papa! Papa! Get back here, boy! Papa! Get back!
He screams to his son through the bars that he will come back to them. The wagon drives off into the distance along dusty roads, crossing the endless cotton fields of Louisiana. As Peter emerges from his slumber, he's startled by the deafening blast of a cannon, and his eyes see a gruesome sight: severed heads of slaves impaled on poles. This macabre scene marks their destination within the territory of the Southern Army, which ruthlessly slaughtered the slaves who tried to run away. The newly arrived slaves are led out of the wagon in shackles, ordered to keep their eyes down. The armed guards bellow and hit the slaves for any given reason, and a few poor souls are even shot on the spot. Peter and the others are forced to build the railroad, doing back-breaking work. When Gordon, Peter's friend, succumbs to exhaustion and falls down, Peter immediately steps in to lend a hand, unaware that this kind of gesture puts him at risk of being shot. The guards take note of Peter's disobedience before shifting their attention to another escaped slave. This runner was eventually captured by guards Harrington and Knowles. The latter happens to be of African descent. Knowles himself used to be a slave, but his exceptional tracking skills enabled him to advance in his career. In order to discipline the escapee, the merciless overseer named Fussell steps in. Using red-hot iron, he marks the slave's face, indicating that he belongs to the people from the South. Everyone is ordered to continue their work amid horrific screams, which continue until late in the evening. John, the beaten runner, is thrown into a cage with the others and shackled to the ground. Thomas, a young slave, begins to shake with fear after the horrors he has witnessed. Peter tries to comfort him by asking about his family who is waiting for him. If one just works and keeps praying to God, he can endure anything. John, despite his agony, hears these words and intervenes. What kind of God can they talk about? Isn't Peter shackled in a cage guarded by dogs and sadistic guards?
Go, stand up, and praise your God for all he has done for you.
Tears of grief roll down Peter's cheeks, but he calmly replies that he will pray for John, even if he doesn't believe in the Creator. John's resentment towards the scripture is explained the next morning when Peter overhears the slave overseer quoting Bible verses while on duty. Naturally, they bring up only the passages that emphasize obedience and the supposed honor of serving one's master. The following day, Peter overhears a conversation between 2 guards discussing Lincoln's proclamation to emancipate the slaves. The runaway slaves regroup in Baton Rouge, the state capital under the control of Northern troops. The guard interrupts his speech by shouting at Thomas because he didn't like the food. He accuses the slave of deliberately ruining his meal and notices Peter's judgmental look. Peter defends the teenager and is brutally beaten for it. Fussell intervenes and personally prevents the unruly slave from being shot. Later, as Peter sits in the cage again, Fussell approaches him. He has heard the slaves talking and declares that he is now Peter's God, for he is the one who decides whether Peter lives or dies. And now, he must know his place and serve Fussell like a faithful dog.
Perhaps you will give me some of that fine meat you give your other dog.
Fussell laughs, appreciating the joke. The next day, he puts a collar on Peter and makes him kneel in front of his dog. which barks right in his face. Facel lets the dog remember the slave's scent well, so that he won't even think of trying to escape. Although everyone thought Peter was a goner, the guards spare him. At lunch, he decides to tell the other slaves about Lincoln's edict and the gathering of runaway slaves in Baton Rouge. If they flee through the swamps, it'll take them approximately 5 days to reach their destination. Gordon's worried about the risk of dying during the journey, but Peter assures him that the chances of being killed by the guards are much higher. John, too, seriously contemplates the offer. They have never had a better opportunity to get free. Sometime later, one slave can't stand the strain of hard work and drops dead on the spot. The guards force Peter to drag the body to a pit that is almost filled to the brim with those who have shared the same tragic fate. Peter reads a quick prayer over the deceased as he watches several white deserters fill the pit with lime to conceal the stench. As soon as they catch sight of Peter, they force him to do their work for them. They give him a shovel, and it dawns on Peter that he holds the missing key to his escape right in his hands. With both guards easily within striking distance, Peter seizes the opportunity when they become distracted by the loud blasting noise. He swiftly incapacitates one guard, cuts off the other guard's hand, and takes the knife before leading the escape. Slaves and deserters scatter, evading the guard's shots. John finds a gun on the ground, and Facel tries to shoot Peter, but misses, and the latter escapes into the woods. After sending the slowest fugitives to meet their maker, Facel calls up Harrington and Knowles. Together with the hounds, they set out on the trail of the slaves. As Peter leads John, Gordon, and Thomas, he attentively listens for any sounds to avoid being detected by their pursuers. Eventually, they spot the swamps and make a mad dash towards them. However, the dogs catch their scent and start closing in. The friends swiftly reach the shore and immediately plunge into the water. Unfortunately, Thomas freezes with fear upon spotting a crocodile, allowing the dogs to catch up to him. The rest of the slaves safely make it to the opposite shore, while the dogs relentlessly attack Thomas. Helpless, Gordon covers his ears with his hands, trying to block out his friend's agonizing screams. Facel and his cronies manage to pull the dogs away and then ask where the other slaves are heading. Not willing to betray his friends, Thomas remains silent in response. In exchange for the information, Facel promises to release Thomas, as he's not worth chasing. Clinging to a faint glimmer of hope, Thomas reveals the entire escape plan. Facel keeps his end of the bargain.
Go on then. Give my regards to old Abe.
As soon as the slave stumbles into the water, however, Facel shoots him. The crocodiles immediately swim up to get their prey. The rest of the escapees keep running, taking advantage of the fact that their pursuers didn't cross the swamp. Peter wants to keep hiding in the thick bushes to avoid any encounters with people, but John plans to follow the well-traveled trails. He refuses to give in or make compromises, and intends to use the gun he stole if necessary. On the other hand, Gordon wants everyone to stick together, but Peter suggests splitting up to make it harder for the pursuers to track them. He tells his scared friend to head towards the sound of Lincoln's army gunfire, and they bid each other farewell. Peter looks around, deciding where to go next, but realizes that Facel's bullet has hit his leg. The smell of blood will surely attract the dogs, so he needs something to dress the wound immediately. Moreover, it's getting harder and harder to keep running, and the pursuers are closing in quickly. As John and Gordon continue on their way, Peter stops. He discovers the house of a white slave-owning family. There, he ties up his wound with a rope and hides behind a stack of logs. He quenches his thirst from the well and snatches some clothes hanging on the line. Eager to keep going, Peter is spotted by a girl who rings the bell alerting others to the presence of the runaway slave. Hearing the commotion, Facel follows the sound to the house, and the family tells him where Peter went. The injured man flees desperately, stopping only to bandage his leg with the stolen cloth. Finding refuge amidst the tall grass, he removes the bloody bandage and hides it in a fallen tree trunk to trick the dog with his scent. To avoid being detected by smell, Peter plunges into the marshy swamp. Moments later, Facel and his men find the bandage. They note the runner is clever and assume that he has crossed over to the other side. Peter watches them carefully and dives under the water to avoid being spotted. When the pursuers leave, he attempts to get onto the shore, but out of the blue, a crocodile attacks him and pulls him deep into the water. Peter manages to squirm free, swiftly grabbing a sturdy stick and shoving it into the crocodile's mouth, saving himself from certain death. He then quickly grabs a knife and thrusts it into the predator's eyes, ending its life. Dodin suddenly wakes up from a terrifying dream where she witnessed her husband being in danger. Startled, the children also wake up after their mother. They all miss their father, but are not sure he is alive.
What if you don't come back? Your papa is going to be back.
Dodin urges her kids not to give up hope and recalls the prayer in their native language, which they recited with Peter as they said goodbye to each other. At this time, Peter too remembers his family. He hides in a tree and removes the swamp leeches from his body with his knife. They've had time to drink his blood, and the red droplets fall on the surrounding bushes. In the morning, the dogs smell the blood, and Facel and his cronies find the dead crocodile. They cut open its belly and find that there is nothing inside, which means that Peter is still alive. The group decides to camp overnight and eat the crocodile. Harrington is extremely impressed that the black man was able to kill such a powerful animal, but Facel is not the least bit surprised. His mother died at an early age, and Facel was raised by an enslaved woman. She fed and taught him, and became a friend to the boy. One day, Facel asked his father if the woman could join them for dinner, but the man replied that if the blacks were given food, they would soon take over the whites' work and then take away the land as well. If you start with one crumb, you'll end up giving them the whole country. The son was ashamed and confessed that he had long been feeding the slave when she was hungry. Then the father called the woman and stabbed her right in front of the boy. She was lying in the field and slowly dying for another 3 days, not understanding why she had been treated so cruelly. When Facel grew up, he saw many more black people like her, all of whom wanted to live and were by no means the fools that white people made them out to be. And to keep them from retaliating, it was necessary to rule them with an iron fist. Knowles, a former slave himself, stares blankly into the darkness while his heartless boss tells his story. The next morning, Peter continues to run, making sure that his body is constantly covered in dirt and animal feces. This is the only way he can escape the dogs. The stench and swarm of flies surround him, making him think of home and his wife's feet, which he washed with clean water. As he crosses another swamp, he fears he will encounter crocodiles and recites a prayer aloud. Sunlight touches his face, and Peter takes it as a blessing from God. He hears the cannons of the Liberation Army and keeps going with renewed strength. He walks all day, and Facel fails to catch up with him. He orders his men to split up to cover more area. In the meantime, Peter finds an old treehouse and carefully climbs up the ladder. Luckily for him, there's no one inside, and he finds drinking water and leftover food. He also sees a small fire pit and still hot coals smoldering in it. He quickly heats his knife in the coals and uses it to cauterize the wound on his leg. While Facel finds drops of blood in the marshes, Peter climbs on a tree, strapping the coals and the cauldron to his belt. The smoke drives away the bees that have set up a hive there, and the man picks up a honeycomb filled with honey. Facel notices the smoke and quickly heads towards its source. Meanwhile, Peter finds a boat next to the treehouse and decides to embark on it. As he prepares to set sail, he realizes there's a snake inside, which nearly bites his leg. Luckily, Peter reacts swiftly, using a branch to toss the snake away. Once the danger is gone, Peter gets into the boat and starts rowing. That same day, Dodin is approached by the owner's assistant, who tells her that she has been sold. The woman is shocked to learn that she is going to be separated from her children, who will remain on the plantation. Dodin herself will have to give birth and take care of new slaves.
Mr. Fabian said he has you a new husband. Now the Charles has been put to war.
As Peter sails away to a safe distance, he takes a moment to savor some delicious honey. He thanks God for keeping him alive, but Facel isn't wasting any time. He explores the treehouse, and when the sound of barking dogs draws near, Peter decides to move on. Walking along the shoreline, the slave hunter comes across an empty boat, while Peter unexpectedly stumbles upon John in the woods. With a gun pointed at him, John threatens to shoot Peter for leading the hounds to him. In response, Peter hands John a wild onion and suggests rubbing it on to mask their scent. Annoyed, John dismisses him as crazy. They run together for a while, but eventually have to hide from their pursuers. Knowles and Harrington easily locate John on a tree with the help of the dogs. They demand that he climb down and surrender his weapon. Peter watches the horrifying scene from inside a decaying trunk.
You do not own me! I am not going back! I am not a slave!
A rifle shot interrupts John's speech, and he falls down. Facel is accurate as usual, and approaches his victim to find out where Peter is hiding. When the still-alive John doesn't answer, Facel pulls out a knife and gets to work. After cutting off John's head, he orders Harrington and Knowles to take it back to the camp to teach others a lesson. Peter turns away not to see his friend die, and whispers a prayer for John's soul. As the slave hunters leave, he gets out of hiding. Standing in the pouring rain, he is utterly shocked by what he sees. One wrong move, and he could have ended up in John's place. The slave owners know no mercy. At the farm, Dodin tells the children the sad news. The eldest daughter suggests they run away, but the mother sees no such possibility. She has another plan. She is not going to part with her family and will do anything to wait for her husband to return. Dodin tells her daughter to head to the barn in the evening, where they process the harvested cotton. There, they use a spinning spike shaft to crush the clumps. Dodin puts her hand inside and asks her daughter to turn the machine's handle. Blood stains the pristine cotton, and a cry of pain resonates through the air. No buyer would be interested in purchasing damaged goods. Trying not to lose faith, Peter walks on alone. He hears a noise and sees horses running away, one of which is engulfed in flames. Peter explores his surroundings and sees a burning house whose owners have been brutally murdered. It seems to be the work of rebellious slaves who have not missed an opportunity to take their revenge in their own hands. With a knife in hand, Peter cautiously enters the house and proceeds to explore the ransacked rooms. As he glances at the soot-covered mirror, his own reflection startles him, but he quickly turns his attention to the dining table. There, he indulges his voracious appetite, savoring the abundant food, a rarity for his exhausted body. Reacting instinctively to any rustle, he suddenly becomes aware of a peculiar, repetitive noise. Peter follows the sound holding a knife in hand and enters a bedroom full of corpses. A dark-skinned girl, trapped under a harp, is plucking its strings to call for help. Peter carries her outside and places her on the table. With her last bit of strength, she continues to whisper prayers.
I want to get you water.
However, the girl stops Peter. She realizes that she is dying, and she gives Peter her cross as a parting gift. Peter accepts it, seeing that it is made of 2 ordinary nails tied together with string. Peter reads a prayer over her body, when suddenly, Harrington appears behind him with a rifle. He demands that the slave drop the knife to the ground and step away from the table, as Peter begs to be allowed to fetch the wounded girl some water. She breathes her last breath. Harrington continues to ignore the fact that an innocent child has just died in front of him. Peter is enraged, and he stealthily clutches the sharp cross in his hand. He stands up, obeying the order, and with a swift move, stabs his opponent in the eye. After killing Harrington, Peter grabs his weapon and manages to dodge Knowles' shot. He shoots back, and the gunman falls to the ground. Dying Knowles tries to tell Peter that Fussell was impressed by the crocodile he had killed, and that he may welcome him into the ranks of the hunters. In response, Peter tells the traitor that he's even worse than his masters and hits him with the butt of his gun. Hearing the familiar barking of dogs, Peter runs into the cotton fields in search of shelter. Fussell finds his men and finishes Knowles off with a shot, while the latter used his last breath to point out where Peter ran. The dogs follow the runaway, and Peter prepares to fight back. He kills the dog with a shot, and Fussell stumbles upon the animal's body, which further strengthens his resolve to take revenge on the slave. In the morning, Peter finds himself on a beach strewn with the bodies of Southerners who have died fighting against Lincoln's army. He desperately searches for food amidst the lifeless bodies, and due to his weak leg and agony, he collapses on the ground. Overhead, clouds drift apathetically, yet the distant sound of cannons rekindles Peter's hope. Peter stands up and sees the ships of the Liberation Army. His yearning for freedom gives him strength to go forward, but a rider on horseback suddenly blocks his way. It's Fussell. He knocks Peter to the ground, continuing to lash the weakened runaway with a whip. Fussell sees that the slave can no longer resist and pulls out a piece of meat he has been feeding the dogs.
Big dog. Big. Big.
Peter only kneels silently, awaiting his fate. As the slave does not obey, Fussell draws his gun and reminds Peter that he is his god. A shot is fired, but it is Fussell who grabs his own throat. Before he could carry out his punishment, someone kills him from behind. The scoundrel falls into Peter's arms, who tells him he is no god. Peter meets his saviors. African-American Captain Andre Caillou of Lincoln's army orders his men to give Peter water. He is unsteady on his feet, and the soldiers help him to the camp. There, he has a long-awaited rest in a field hospital, seeing dreams of his wife and children. When Peter wakes up, the nun nurse tells him that his chances of survival were slim. After traveling through the swamps, the wound on his leg was badly infected. She says they're in Baton Rouge, and Peter says he needs to go find his family, but he is still too weak and is left to rest, with doctors taking care of him. An increasing number of escaped slaves are making their way to the capital, with many of them succumbing to injuries and illnesses in the adjacent bunks. Nevertheless, the Northern Army keeps replenishing its ranks with fresh recruits and pushing forward. As soon as Peter is on his feet, he goes to get his first identity documents as a free man. He doesn't even know how old he is, so he asks the clerk to pick his age for him. His parents were from the island of Haiti, where his family were taken as slaves. He tells of his escape, and a military man takes an interest in his experience in building a railroad. Although Peter wants to see his family as soon as possible, they are not going to let him go. Since there is a war going on, each man must either work on the farm, providing provisions, or join the army.
You help us beat these godforsaken devils, my good man, and you'll not just get back with your family.
A shocked Peter realizes that his hopes have once again been shattered by a harsh reality. Will he ever be free? His silence is interpreted as consent to join the army. At the camp, Peter happens to notice Gordon being carried on a stretcher. He is wounded and exhausted, but still alive, unlike John, who will be missed by his friends. Peter goes to see his rescuer Andre Caillou and get his soldier's uniform, but then strangers approach him and ask him to come with them. Peter is wary, but the captain tells him that these white men are good people and their intentions are good. He makes his way to the tent, where the photographer asks the man to sit down in front of the camera.
Peter, we're gonna make sure that every person in the world knows exactly what slavery truly looks like.
Peter turns his back, exposing deep scars from hundreds of lashes. Later, he finds himself dressed in his military uniform, being escorted to meet a high-ranking officer who asks Peter about the enemy's firearms and army. It becomes clear that someone needs to mount the attack and draw the enemy's artillery fire. Despite Peter's successful escape and survival in the treacherous swamps, it doesn't mean he's fit for combat. Moreover, the visible scars on his body serve as a sign of disobedience in the eyes of the general. Caillou tries to take Peter away, but he just keeps standing there. He replies to the general that he has hit back and fought his torturers. He has endured so much torture and broken bones that he can no longer remember and count them all. But Peter didn't give up.
But they never break me.
The general listens carefully to his words and treats Peter with respect. At dawn, Caillou leads their regiment into battle. The captain, who was born a free man, says that Peter's speech has put him to shame. The next day, Caillou reminds the soldiers that they are fighting for the most precious thing a man has: freedom. While their enemies want to hold on to their power and money, the regiment passes the wounded and the dead, and many of them get shot as they try to reach the firing positions. Peter and the others hold the line, making their way forward through the smoke and enemy fortifications. Artillery fire intensifies, and Peter gets a concussion from an explosion, while Gordon gets shot and falls down. Waking up in a puddle, Peter crawls forward as he watches his allies fall from their wounds. Even Caillou is not spared from this fate. Peter shoots from cover, but the enemy bullet almost gets him there as well. Hearing the screams of a dying soldier, he helps him pass away peacefully by reciting a prayer. Afterward, he finds a panicked Gordon and helps him up. He sees the cannons that must be destroyed to achieve victory, and with a battle cry, he leads the soldiers out of the trench. The attack proves successful. Peter drives the bayonet into the gunner's body, securing the win for their side. This battle turns the tide of the war, and the victorious army marches triumphantly southward, liberating each plantation and restoring justice. Peter's previous owner gets shot for his crimes. With anticipation in his eyes, Peter searches for his family, but they are nowhere to be seen. The other slaves remain unaware of the true meaning of freedom.
Free? What you mean, free?
You're free.
You ain't gotta do this no more.
The plantation workers fall to their knees, gradually realizing their fortune. Peter goes into the house where he lived with his family, but it is empty, and none of the former slaves can tell him where his family is. Desperate and lost in the crowd, he begins to recite a prayer. When he finishes, he looks up, and his daughter recognizes him.
Papa? Papa?
Dodin rushes into her husband's embrace, unable to trust her own eyes. Despite the numerous struggles they faced, they are finally reunited. Peter's eyes fill with tears of joy, and he thanks God for everything. Before Lincoln's decree, Louisiana had a staggering 47% of its population enslaved. Yet, remarkably, it also boasted the highest numbers of free black residents in all the states. Despite this, the majority of the white population, especially in the larger cities, supported the institution of slavery. The photo of Peter became an iconic historical symbol, spreading worldwide and ultimately debunking the false claims of slave owners who argued that slaves were treated as human beings. In the year of emancipation, over 400,000 slaves managed to escape their masters. 3 years later, nearly 4 million people finally gained their freedom and became citizens. This film marked Will Smith's return to the big screen since the incident at the Oscars 2022, where he slapped Chris Rock on live television. Many speculated that the release of the film would be delayed due to the scandal, but it ultimately premiered as scheduled. Smith received a staggering $35 million for his lead role, the largest amount he has been paid in his career. As always, check out the name of the movie in the video description. In the meantime, tell us in the comments, what aspects of our current lives do you believe will seem uncivilized to our descendants? And don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the like button to see even more cool recaps.